What if I told you that humans spent centuries dreaming of flight, only to crash, burn, and fail spectacularly for decades? Saki, welcome to Inventions That Failed. I'm your host, and today we're diving into the absolutely wild world of early aviation disasters. But before we take off, and trust me, many didn't, smash that subscribe button because you won't believe what people tried to strap to their bodies. Now, here's my opinion. The early aviation pioneers weren't just brave, they were absolutely insane, and thank God for that. Think about it. Would you jump off a cliff wearing wooden wings and fabric? Comment below. Are you brave enough or just crazy enough? The Wright brothers finally cracked the code in 1903, but what you don't know is the graveyard of failures that came before them. We're talking about machines that defied logic, physics, and basic common sense, and somehow people kept trying. So buckle up, or should I say, strap on your questionable wings as we explore the most spectacular aviation failures in history. From tower jumpers to steam-powered disasters, we'll cover why these inventions failed, so you can appreciate just how miraculous modern flight really is. Let's start our journey in the medieval period, where the line between genius and madness was thinner than the fabric on their homemade wings. Picture this. It's 1010 AD, and a Benedictine monk named Aylmer of Malmesbury thinks he's figured out flight by studying birds. This guy literally strapped wings to his arms and jumped from the Abbey Tower. Spoiler alert, gravity won. He flew about 200 yards before crashing and breaking both legs. But here's the kicker. He blamed his failure on forgetting to add a tail. What do you think? Was Aylmer a visionary, or just the medieval equivalent of someone who thinks they can fly after watching Superman? The tragic truth is that Aylmer's approach was fundamentally flawed. Birds don't just flap their arms, they have completely different physiology. But the tower jumping craze was just beginning. Enter Giovanni Battista Dante in 1503, who also thought wings plus height equals flight. Dante jumped from a tower in Perugia and actually managed to fly straight into the roof of a church. Divine intervention or poor planning? Here's my take. These weren't just failed inventions. They were necessary experiments that taught us what not to do. The real problem? They were trying to copy birds instead of understanding the actual physics of flight. It's like trying to swim by copying fish without understanding buoyancy. Let me ask you this. If you lived in that era, would you have been brave enough to test these flying machines? Or smart enough to stay on the ground? The tower jumping trend continued for centuries because people confused altitude with aviation. Higher doesn't always mean better. One of the most tragic cases was Abbas ibn Firnas in 875 AD. He actually understood the need for a proper landing system. Ibn Firnas built wings from silk and eagle feathers, jumped from a mountain, and flew for 10 whole minutes before crash landing. His mistake? No tail for steering or landing control. He broke his back but survived, proving that early aviation was literally a pain in the rear. What fascinates me is how these failures were actually building blocks. Each crash taught valuable lessons about aerodynamics and control. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most tower jumpers died. We remember the survivors, but dozens perished for the dream of flight. The persistence is both inspiring and terrifying. Would modern safety regulations have prevented the Wright brothers? What do you think? By the 1600s, people started realizing that maybe, just maybe, human-powered flapping wasn't the answer. But before we move on to the next era of failures, let's appreciate these tower jumpers for what they were. The original test pilots. They may have crashed and burned, but they lit the spark that would eventually become the fire of human flight. Speaking of fire, welcome to the Industrial Revolution, where inventors thought, if steam can power trains, why not flying machines? Enter Hiram Maxim in 1894, who built what was essentially a flying steam locomotive. Yes, you heard that right. Maxim's machine weighed 8,000 pounds and had a 104-foot wingspan. It was less flying machine and more airborne disaster waiting to happen. Here's my opinion. Maxim confused more power with better engineering. It's like trying to make a hummingbird out of a bulldozer. The machine actually generated enough lift to rise off the ground and immediately crash into its safety rail system. Maxim claimed this was a success because it proved powered flight was possible. Personally, I think that's like calling the Titanic a successful submarine. But wait, it gets better. Clement Ader in France built a steam-powered bat. Yes, a mechanical bat with boiler and wings. Ader's Aole had canvas wings shaped like a bat's, and it actually hopped about 160 feet in 1890. Progress, sort of. The problem with steam power? It's heavy, hot, and explosive. Not exactly ideal characteristics for something you want to fly in. Let me ask you, would you trust your life to a steam engine that could explode at 1,000 feet? Comment your thoughts below. The steam era taught us that power-to-weight ratio is everything in aviation. These machines had power, but weighed more than elephants. Samuel Langley, backed by the Smithsonian, spent a fortune building steam-powered aeroplanes that barely qualified as controlled crashes. Langley's great aerodrome crashed into the Potomac River twice in 1903. The press called it Langley's Folly. Harsh, but fair. Meanwhile, two bicycle mechanics in Ohio were quietly figuring out what these well-funded scientists couldn't: control matters more than power. The irony is delicious. While Langley was burning government money on steam disasters, the Wright brothers solved flight for the cost of a used car. What's your take? Do you think big budgets and institutional support help innovation, or do they sometimes get in the way? The steam-powered era proved that throwing money and complexity at a problem doesn't always work. Sometimes simple is better. But let's give credit where it's due. These steam pioneers proved powered flight was theoretically possible, even if their execution was disastrous. Plus, watching Victorian gentlemen try to pilot steam-powered flying machines must have been the Netflix of the 1890s. From steam disasters, let's move to an even more dangerous obsession: ornithopters, machines that tried to fly by flapping wings. If humans could fly like birds, we needed machines that flew like birds, right? Wrong, so spectacularly wrong. The ornithopter obsession lasted for centuries because, let's face it, it looks like it should work. Birds flap, they fly. Simple. Leonardo da Vinci spent years designing ornithopters in the 1480s. His sketches are beautiful, but they're basically medieval death traps with wings. The fundamental problem? Bird flight is incredibly complex. It's not just flapping, it's controlled. Variable geometry in real time. But did that stop inventors? Absolutely not. Enter Gustave Trouvé in 1870, who built an ornithopter powered by gunpowder cartridges. Yes, you heard right, gunpowder, because apparently what flapping wings needed was more explosions. What could go wrong? Trouvé's machine flapped its way to a spectacular crash, proving that sometimes the solution is worse than the problem. Here's my opinion. The ornithopter obsession shows how humans sometimes get stuck copying nature instead of understanding principles. It's like trying to build a car by making a mechanical horse. The end goal is the same, but the method matters. Vincent de Groot, known as the Flying Man of Brussels, spent years perfecting his ornithopter design. Spoiler, it didn't end well. De Groot's machine had articulated wings that could adjust their angle during flight. Revolutionary idea, terrible execution. In 1874, he convinced a balloonist to drop him over London. De Groot fell to his death when his wings collapsed mid-flight. The ornithopter failures taught us that nature's solutions aren't always the best engineering solutions for humans. Birds have hollow bones, specialized flight muscles, and millions of years of evolution. We have none of that. What do you think? Should inventors have studied bird flight more carefully, or was the ornithopter approach doomed from the start? The funny thing is, ornithopters still fascinate people today. We have remote-controlled ornithopter toys that actually work. But it took modern materials, computer control, and electric motors to make ornithopters work, not just copying bird anatomy. The ornithopter obsession lasted so long because the goal seemed obvious. Sometimes the obvious solution is wrong. It's a perfect example of how innovation often requires thinking differently, not just thinking harder about the same approach. But speaking of thinking differently, let's talk about the inventors who got creative with their power sources. Spoiler? It involved rockets. If flapping wings didn't work and steam was too heavy, what about rockets? Because clearly, what aviation needed was more explosions. Meet Fritz von Opel, who in 1928 decided to strap rockets to a glider, because apparently safety first wasn't a thing yet. Von Opel's rocket plane actually flew for 75 seconds, covering nearly 2 miles. Success! Until you consider it was basically a controlled explosion with wings. Here's my take. Strapping rockets to a glider is like solving transportation by sitting on a firework. Technically it works, but the rocket approach had one tiny problem. Once you light them, you're basically riding a missile that you can't turn off. Valier and Sander took this madness further, building rocket cars and rocket planes. Their motto seemed to be, "Go fast or die trying." Max Valier actually died when his rocket engine exploded on the test stand. The rocket age claimed its first martyr. What fascinates me is how these inventors confused fast with good. Speed isn't everything in aviation. Control and safety matter too. But I have to ask, would you have been brave enough to test a rocket plane? Or smart enough to say, absolutely not? The rocket experiments did prove that jet propulsion was possible, but they also proved that suicide missions aren't sustainable business models. Helmut Walter developed rocket engines for aircraft that used hydrogen peroxide, basically concentrated hair bleach as rocket fuel. The Me-163 rocket fighter could reach 600 Mallarmé in 1944, but it also had a tendency to explode on landing. Minor design flaw. Rocket planes taught us that raw power without control systems is just an expensive way to create craters. The irony? While people were strapping rockets to planes, others were quietly developing jet engines that actually made sense. Frank Whittle in Britain and Hans von Ohain in Germany were solving jet propulsion properly, while others were playing with fireworks. The difference? Jet engines provide continuous, controllable thrust. Rockets provide brief, uncontrollable excitement, followed by silence. What's your opinion? Do you think the rocket experiments were necessary stepping stones or dangerous distractions from real progress? I think rocket planes represent humanity's greatest strength and weakness. We'll try anything, even when it's obviously insane. The rocket era ended when people realized that maybe, just maybe, survival should be part of the flight plan. But before rockets, there was an even more fundamental problem that plagued early aviation: the complete misunderstanding of control. Here's something most people don't realize. Before the Wright brothers, nobody understood how to steer a flying machine. Inventors focused on getting airborne, then discovered a terrifying truth. Being in the air without control is just falling with style. Sir George Cayley, the father of aerodynamics, built a glider in 1853 that actually flew. His coachman was the unwilling test pilot. After landing, the coachman allegedly said, "I was hired to drive, not to fly." Smart man, he understood the job description. Cayley's glider could fly, but it couldn't turn, climb, or descend safely. It was basically an expensive way to travel in straight lines. The control problem stumped everyone. Otto Lilienthal made over 2,000 glider flights, but still controlled his aircraft by shifting his body weight. Lilienthal's method worked, until it didn't. A gust of wind in 1896 caused a crash that killed him. Weight shifting has limits. Here's my opinion. The control problem was harder than the power problem. Any idiot can make something fast. Making it steerable is genius. Most inventors thought control could be figured out after flight. That's like learning to drive while falling off a cliff. The Wright brothers were different. They spent 3 years in a wind tunnel studying control before they even attempted powered flight. What question would you ask if you could time travel to 1903? I'd ask why it took so long to realize control came before power. Octave Chanute built beautiful gliders, but struggled with control. His aircraft could glide gracefully until they needed to change direction. The fundamental breakthrough was 3-axis control: pitch, roll, and yaw. Before that, aircraft were basically aerial rockets. Percy Pilcher improved on Lilienthal's designs, but still relied on body shifting. He died in 1899 when his glider broke up in flight. What's tragic is that the control problem was solvable with 1890s technology. It just required systematic thinking, not heroic stunts. The Wright brothers' genius was treating flight as an engineering problem, not a daredevil spectacle. Boring, but brilliant. By 1903, they had solved pitch control with elevators, roll control with wing warping, and yaw control with a rudder. Revolutionary. What do you think took longer, figuring out how to generate lift or figuring out how to control it once you had it? The control problem lasted decades because inventors confused courage with competence. Science beat bravery in the end. But even after the Wright brothers solved control, people kept making the same materials mistakes that plagued aviation for years. Imagine building an aircraft out of paper, wood, and hope. Welcome to early aviation, where material science was more art than science. The Wright Flyer was made of spruce wood and cotton fabric. It worked, but it was basically a flying tent with an engine. Early aviators discovered that aircraft face stresses that no land vehicle experiences. Wind, gravity, and panic create unique challenges. Alberto Santos Dumont built aircraft that looked elegant but used materials better suited for furniture than flight. Here's my opinion. Early aviation materials were chosen for availability, not suitability. It's like building a submarine out of cardboard. Wood seemed logical. It was light, strong, and familiar. But wood also rots, splits, and breaks under stress. Fabric wings worked until they got wet, tore, or simply stretched out of shape. Rain was basically an enemy of aviation. Wire bracing seemed clever until inventors discovered that wires could snap, stretch, or vibrate themselves to death. What would you use to build an aircraft in 1910? Remember, aluminum wasn't available, and plastics didn't exist yet. Some inventors tried steel frames, but steel is heavy. Others tried bamboo, which was light but brittle. Trade-offs everywhere. The real breakthrough came with understanding that aircraft materials need completely different properties than building materials. Hugo Junkers pioneered all-metal aircraft construction in 1915. Revolutionary, but his first planes looked like flying washing machines. Metal aircraft solved durability, but created new problems: weight, corrosion, and manufacturing complexity. Meanwhile, fabric aircraft kept evolving. By 1918, they were using Irish linen doped with chemicals for strength and waterproofing. But even improved fabric had limits. Temperature changes could shrink or stretch the covering, changing the wing's shape and flight characteristics. What's fascinating is how material limitations shaped aircraft design. Form didn't follow function, it followed material properties. The transition to modern materials took decades. Aluminum became standard in the 1920s, but carbon fiber waited until the 1970s. Early material disasters taught us that aviation pushes materials to their limits. What works on the ground might fail at altitude. Today's aircraft use materials that early aviators couldn't even imagine: titanium, carbon composites, advanced ceramics. But even with perfect materials, early aviation faced one final enemy that defeated many otherwise successful designs: the weather. Early aviators discovered that the sky isn't empty. It's full of invisible violence that could destroy aircraft in seconds. Wind wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a death sentence. Many early flights ended in crosswind crashes on takeoff or landing. Cal Rogers attempted the first cross-country flight in 1911. He crashed 19 times due to weather, mechanical failures, and optimism. Rain was catastrophic for fabric aircraft. Wet fabric became heavy, saggy, and less effective. Plus, it made everything slippery. Here's my take. Early aviators had no weather forecasting, no radio, and no idea what they were flying into. It was aerial Russian roulette. What would you do if you encountered a thunderstorm in 1915? There were no instruments, no weather radar, and no escape plan. Ice formation was a mystery that killed many pilots. Engine carburetor ice could cause power loss without warning. High-altitude flying revealed new weather hazards. Oxygen deprivation caused pilots to make poor decisions or lose consciousness. Temperature extremes wreaked havoc on early aircraft. Cold made metal brittle. Heat caused engines to overheat. Fog was the great equalizer. It defeated expert pilots as easily as beginners. No visibility meant no safe landing. Wind shear, sudden changes in wind direction or speed, could flip aircraft without warning. Invisible air turbulence was deadly. The weather taught early aviation a harsh lesson. The sky belongs to the atmosphere, and humans are just temporary visitors. What's amazing is how quickly aviation developed weather-fighting technology: instruments, radio, radar, and weather services. Today's pilots have weather information that would seem like magic to early aviators. We've tamed the sky, mostly. But even with all our technology, weather still wins sometimes. It's a reminder that nature sets the rules for flight. So what did we learn from all these spectacular failures? First, that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the path to success. Every crash taught valuable lessons. Every explosion revealed what not to do. Every disaster brought us closer to safe flight. What's your biggest takeaway? Mine is that innovation requires accepting failure as tuition for the University of Human Progress. The Wright brothers succeeded because they learned from everyone else's mistakes. They built on a foundation of other people's failures. Thanks for joining me on this journey through aviation's failures. Like and subscribe for more stories of spectacular human ambition and equally spectacular crashes.